In 1914, Europe stood as the pinnacle of human civilization. For nearly a century, the continent had flourished in peace and prosperity. This period, often referred to as Europe's Golden Age, was marked by an unprecedented era of economic growth, technological innovation, and cultural advancement. Europe's power stretched across the globe, its influence shaping not just the course of nations, but also the lives of millions. By 1914, Europe had been enjoying nearly a century of peace. Yes, there had been smaller wars, but the grand conflicts that had once defined Europe, the wars between the great powers, seemed to be a thing of the past. The nations of Europe were richer than ever before. They were healthier, happier, and better fed. Scientific advancements came with awe-inspiring regularity advancements like the telephone, the motor car, electricity, and the aeroplanal symbols of Europe's boundless potential. It was a time of optimism, energy, and ambition. Every year, every generation seemed to bring new wonders. The world was watching Europe in awe of its achievements. It was a time when everything seemed possible. The old fears and divisions between nations appeared to have been overcome, and Europe's young and self-confident energy gave the world hope. The century was set to end in the same glorious fashion it had begun, with peace, prosperity, and progress. But as history has shown, greatness is fragile, and the peaceful, prosperous Europe of 1914 was about to be shattered. In the span of a month, everything would change. The First World War, or the seminal catastrophe, as George Kennan called it, would mark the end of an era. In June 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, traveled to Sarajevo with his wife, Sophie. They were greeted by a young Bosnian Serb, Gavrilo Princip, who shot them both, killing them instantly. What seemed like an isolated assassination, a tragic and sudden act in a forgotten corner of Europe, would set off a chain of events that would engulf the entire continent. What is so remarkable about this assassination is that, in 1914, few people expected such a war. There was no widespread sense that Europe was on the brink of catastrophe. If there was to be a war in the summer of 1914, the general assumption was that it would be a small, localized conflict, perhaps between Greece and the Ottoman Empire. Few could have imagined that an act of political violence in Sarajevo would lead to a full-scale war that would bring millions of men to the battlefield. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand was the spark, but the fire that consumed Europe was the result of deep-rooted, long-standing tensions between the great powers. The assassination was the catalyst, but the underlying cause was something far greater, a complex web of political alliances, national rivalries, and power struggles that had been building for decades. To understand why Europe plunged into war so quickly in 1914, we must look back to the late 19th century. The rise of Germany as a unified empire, orchestrated by Otto von Bismarck, fundamentally altered the balance of power in Europe. Before Bismarck's efforts, Germany was divided into 5 independent states. But Bismarck, a master of diplomacy, used both war and political maneuvering to unite these states under Prussian leadership. Bismarck's method was simple: diplomacy backed by military power. he forged alliances, waged wars, and manipulated events to create a new German empire that would rival the long-standing powers of Europe. Bismarck's most significant achievement was the unification of Germany, a process that was both brutal and brilliant. Through his calculated actions, Bismarck ensured that Prussia would lead a united Germany. In 1864, he waged war against Denmark, using the conflict as a pretext to gain control of the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. Then, in 1866, he defeated Austria in the 7 Weeks' War, eliminating Austria's influence over German affairs and cementing Prussia's dominance. Finally, in 1870, Bismarck manipulated tensions with France, leading to the Franco-Prussian War. Germany emerged victorious, and the French emperor was captured. France was forced to pay a massive indemnity and cede the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine. With France humbled and weakened, Germany was now the preeminent power in Europe. Bismarck's diplomacy, built on maintaining peace through careful alliances, kept the continent relatively stable for decades. But the rise of a unified Germany also created new tensions, particularly with France, who would never accept the loss of Alsace and Lorraine. These tensions would fester for years. In 1888, Wilhelm II ascended to the German throne. Unlike his predecessor, Wilhelm I, who had supported Bismarck's careful diplomacy, Wilhelm was determined to change Germany's approach to foreign policy. He dismissed Bismarck in 1890, setting in motion a series of events that would lead Europe into war. Bismarck's careful system of alliances had kept Germany's neighbors at bay, but Wilhelm, full of youthful ambition, sought to assert Germany's dominance on the world stage. His decision to build a new navy and challenge Britain's naval superiority alarmed the British, who had long been the dominant naval power. This shift in German foreign policy led to the formation of new alliances. France, once isolated, now found an ally in Russia, and in 1894, the Franco-Russian alliance was formalized. In response, Germany strengthened its alliances with Austria, Hungary, and Italy, forming the Triple Alliance. The new alliances divided Europe into 2 hostile camps, each committed to defending its interests, even at the cost of war. The peace that Europe had enjoyed for nearly a century was increasingly fragile, held together only by the complex and contradictory treaties and agreements. While Europe's great powers jockeyed for position, the Balkans became a source of tension that could not be ignored. The region had long been a point of contention for Austria-Hungary and Russia, both of whom had competing interests in the area. The decline of the Ottoman Empire left a vacuum, and both Austria-Hungary and Russia sought to fill it. Austria-Hungary, eager to expand its influence, annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1908. A move that was seen as an affront to Serbia, who had long hoped to unite the Slavic peoples of the Balkans. Serbia's nationalistic ambitions were in direct conflict with Austria-Hungary's, and tensions between the two countries continued to rise. Serbia found an ally in Russia, who shared its Slavic heritage and sought to protect Serbia from Austrian expansion. As nationalism surged throughout the Balkans, the region became a powder keg. Serbia, emboldened by its alliance with Russia, began to push for greater independence from Austria-Hungary. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand in 1914 was the inevitable result of these rising tensions. Determined to crush Serbia's ambitions, declared war on Serbia. Russia, bound by treaty to defend Serbia, mobilized its forces. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia, and soon, France, bound by an alliance with Russia, was drawn in. Germany's declaration of war on France, followed by the invasion of Belgium, brought Britain into the war. What began as a localized conflict quickly escalated into a world war, involving the major powers of Europe and eventually spreading beyond Europe's borders. The war that followed was unlike any the world had ever seen. It was a war of unprecedented scale and brutality. For 4 years, Europe would be torn apart by trench warfare, chemical weapons, and brutal battles that left millions dead. The Western Front, where the majority of the fighting took place, became a desolate wasteland of trenches, barbed wire, and mud. Soldiers lived in horrific conditions, fighting not just for victory, but for survival. The war was not just a military struggle, it was a cultural and social upheaval. The war shattered the old European order, destroying empires and monarchies that had stood for centuries. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire all collapsed during the war. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, placed the blame for the war squarely on Germany and imposed harsh reparations. The map of Europe was redrawn, and the old order was gone. In the aftermath of the war, Europe was left to pick up the pieces. The continent was devastated, and the scars of the war would remain for generations. The European miracle, which had taken a millennium to build, was destroyed in just 1 month. The war marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new, darker age. Europe's greatness was gone, replaced by a broken, fractured continent struggling to rebuild. The legacy of World War I reverberated throughout the 20th century. The rise of fascism, communism, and the United States as a global superpower reshaped the world. The war set the stage for the Second World War, which would again engulf the world in conflict. Europe, once the center of civilization and power, would never be the same. The peace that had once seemed so permanent was shattered, and Europe was forever changed. The ideals of progress, prosperity, and peace that had once defined the continent were replaced by the bitter realities of war, poverty, and political upheaval. In the end, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, a seemingly minor event, set off a chain reaction that destroyed Europe's grandeur. The European miracle that had taken a millennium to create was undone in a matter of weeks. Europe's golden age had ended, and the world was left to deal with the aftermath.